Okay, guys, I'm back with Chapter 9 and Chapter 10. I'll try to make these as short and sweet as possible. We're moving now to the social reaction theories of crime that are also labeled as labeling theory. These theories are now referred to a range of ways that are both formal and informal of social control towards crime. In these theories, the emphasis is no longer placed on delinquency, but in other words, it is placed on the reaction to the behavior of the individual and how it affects the individual. Labeling theorists believe that the official reactions to law violations in turn label people as criminals and ensnare them into the deviant identity. In other words, because you label them a criminal, therefore they are a criminal. In addition, the individual's personality and the way that they react to society, as well as how they look, can influence how society perceives them. And the social reaction theories describe a criminal in terms of physical characteristics and personality. Labeling theory and social conflict theories provide a critical perspective for the examination of major assumptions in criminology. Those that back up the labeling theory argue that the individual is constantly changing, is a constantly changing being who responds to the reactions of others. This theory originated with symbolic interactionism in sociology, and this means that an individual's identity and self-concept, their cognitive processes, their values, their attitudes, are seen as existing only in the context of society. So they're acting, reacting, and changing in the social interaction with others. Charles Horton Cooley and George Herbert Mead laid the foundation for labeling theory, as well as later theorist Herbert Bloomer. They emphasized that the understanding of ourselves is communicated in face-to-face interaction through language, verbal utterances, and gestures, and the interplay of this interaction with an individual's self-identity and how others react to us. So instead of looking at something objectively and looking at interactions between people, this theory supports that the meaning of words and actions to the actors, to those involved in a communication, is what forms a person. And this is what Cooley called the looking glass self. That will be on your quiz. And as I said a minute ago, it suggests that the individual is a constantly changing person who responds to the reaction of others. What is important to labeling theorists is what happens after the crime, not what caused the crime. These are why they're called social reaction theories. And a formal response by the CJ system therefore forces the individual to reassess his or her personal identity, to relook at themselves. Now, this is the opposite of deterrence theory. And please remember that part, because we're going to have an activity in class where I want you to understand that social reaction theory is the opposite of deterrence. And why is that? Think about it. Deterrence theory is looking at how do we deter crime, how do we stop crime, but reaction theory is looking at it after the crime. Frank Tannenbaum, he is a social reaction theorist, and he termed dramatization of evil. He published Crime and Community, and he sought to expand the ability of theories that are already out there in order to explain criminal behavior by focusing on what transpired after an individual had been caught and identified. So again, it's after the actions. He termed this process of reacting to illegal behavior as the dramatization of evil. He also connected this to what he called legal relativism, which is not inherently good or evil, but that there are varying degrees of good and evil. and the social audience, those people that are reacting, influence the label placed upon the specific behavior and therefore the individual. Edward Lamert, he published Social Pathology and termed the two primary deviation and secondary deviation. Primary refers to occasional or situational behavior that can be excused or explained away by the actor and or the social audience, those that are watching. Secondary deviance, on the other hand, is the result of a dynamic interaction between the individual's deviation and how society responds to that. And in other words, that means that somebody accepts the label that has been put on them by society and then acts according to that label. Howard Becker, he is another social reactionist, and he said that deviance is created by society, and he means this in which the causes of deviance are located in the social situation of the deviant or in social factors which prompted his action. He said that social groups create deviance by making the rules whose infraction constitutes deviance and by applying those rules to a particular group and therefore labeling them as outsiders. Simply stated, he's really saying that deviance is a consequence of the application by others of rules and sanctions to an offender. It's not the quality of the act the person commits, but rather a consequence from society. The deviant is one to whom the label has successfully been applied. Deviant behavior is behavior that people so label that behavior. It's just the consequence of the response of others. And those that have been labeled deviant, they all share one thing. They share the label of deviance and the experience of being labeled as outsiders, outside of the society norms. In other words, whether an act is deviant or not just depends on how people react to it. He also believed that the term deviant should actually be reserved for those that have actually committed a deviant act, and those that have broken rules should really just be referred to as rule-breaking behavior. And he developed his 4 different types of rule breakers: those that are falsely accused, that are pure deviant, conformist, and the secret deviant. And something really important, he said that some individuals that are labeled as rule breakers, even though they never committed a breaking of the rule or a deviant criminal act. Also, others that have committed law violations or broken the rules, they're never apprehended and therefore they're never labeled. And as I said, that he said that the existence of a rule does not automatically guarantee that it will be enforced. He questioned that when are rules made and enforced, and stated that there are many variations in rule enforcement. Cannot account for rule enforcement by invoking some abstract group that is ever vigilant, and said that society is harmed by every infraction it acts to restore the balance. He looks at it, if you think of an extreme example of a group that follows all the rules, that the rules are strictly enforced. But this is typically not the case within our society, right? Nobody follows every rule all the time. But he said it's more typical for rules to be enforced when something actually provokes enforcement. Therefore, he said, enforcement requires explanation. According to Becker, someone that he called an entrepreneur must take the initiative in punishing the culprit. the bad person. Second, enforcement occurs when those who want the rule enforced publicly bring the infraction to the attention of others. And once an infraction has been made public, it therefore cannot be ignored. So he had his levels. He had master status, where a criminal is assumed to be an undesirable person who has no respect for the law and is likely to commit any number of crimes in order to get what they want. Moral entrepreneurs, individuals who either serve as rule creators or rule enforcers, and the moral panic, which is the public's perception of behaviors or groups of persons that greatly exaggerate their potential harm to the larger society. And remember, again, these are all this theorist's belief on how society is reacting to crime. And Edwin Scher, he thought that society and the system should react to juvenile delinquents and adolescents differently. He argued that nothing should be done with or to the children who violate the law, and that society should take a more tolerant stance and allow adolescents to experiment. In other words, they're growing. We shouldn't punish them. We shouldn't do anything but let them experiment with their behavioral alternatives. And sometimes, just to sum up labeling theory, sometimes we think of labeling theory as a very easily understood concept, right? You label somebody a certain way, therefore they believe they are, and they continue that behavior. But there is research, and there are some identified problems with the with the labeling theory. And if I said learning theory, I apologize. I mean labeling theory. That's what we're talking about. Label someone a certain label, and therefore they believe that's who they are. Charles Tittle, he identified two basic problems with this theory, and he proposed that some of the terms and the propositions within this label are ambiguous and very difficult to study in order to study relationship between variables. He also said that there's an absence of data that really tests the labeling perspective. And so now we're going to move to critical criminology, which is still under the umbrella of the social reaction theories. Karl Marx is a man that is strongly associated with conflict theory and critical criminology. He was acutely aware of the important role of law in attempting to understand the nature of society. He believed that the dominant feature of all societies was the mode of production. In other words, the way in which people develop and produce material goods. He believed that society is composed of groups that have opposing values and interests, and that the state represents the values and interests of the groups with the most power. He also believed that the economic base of society is what shaped all of social arrangements, and also saw the state as semi-autonomous from the power elite. George Vold, he's another name that you'll probably see a lot of as you study theory, as long as you continue. I know y'all just want to continue on with your master's and your PhD, and probably do it just in theory as much as you love this stuff. But anyway, he viewed humans as a group oriented and society as a collection of groups, each with its own interest, and suggested that groups come into conflict with one another as though these interests and purposes they serve overlap. And this theory was most appropriate for explaining crime that arises from political protest, that results from labor disputes, that arises from racial and ethnic classes, and arises from disputes between and within competing unions. So we're looking at really the conflict that goes on in society because of your interest. And as we move along the time continuum, we move into what is considered the radical era, which was the 1960s and 70s. Austin Turk, he maintained that the label or status of a criminal is put on individuals in subordinate or powerless positions in society. So he's looking at criminal and class. Now, his belief is very similar to the labeling perspective that we talked about a little bit earlier. And he stated that nothing and no one is intrinsically criminal. Criminality is a definition applied by individuals with the power to do so according to illegal and extra-legal as well as legal criteria. So again, he's saying those that are defined as criminal by those within the power is the reason that someone is a criminal, which is his term for criminalization. The process of being labeled criminal requires more than just breaking the law. It results from interactions between the enforcers and the violators, the difference in the classes. And he identified 5 social factors that shaped that criminalization. The congruence of cultural and social norms, the level of organization of the subjects, the degree of sophistication in the interpretation of the behaviors, the power differential between the enforcers and the violators, and the realism of moves during the conflict. And he also stated that criminalization will occur most probably when both enforcers and resistors have a high congruence between cultural and social norms, both groups engage in unrealistic moves, and the power difference clearly favors the enforcer. And Richard Quinney, he proposed a slightly different explanation of crime and criminal behavior and viewed crime as the product of social definition, and asserted that crime is a function of a stratified social system where the actions of one group are judged and categorized by the dominant group. So again, we're seeing the clash of cultures. Social reality of crime theory includes 6 propositions. I'm going to go ahead and read those for those of you who are listening to it. And I hope I'm not putting you to sleep. Want me to yell and scream? The propositions are definitions of crime, for 1, 2, formulation of criminal definitions, 3, application of criminal definitions, 4, the development of behavior patterns in relation to criminal definitions, 5, construction of criminal conceptions, and 6, the social reality of crime. William Chambliss and Robert Seidman, they worked together to publish Law, Order, and Power in 1971, and they analyzed Marxism a little bit more in depth. Their view of the organization of society was that the law represents the values of society, and if it does not represent the values, then it at least expresses the best common denominator of the society and operates through a value-neutral structure. Ultimately, it's controlled by the choice of the people. In the long run, the law served the best interest of society. But they believed that the law does not represent the public interest, but rather that it represents those in the power. Now we're just going to briefly touch on some more contemporary critical thoughts. That there are 3 contemporary streams of thought. The first one is left realism, that maintains that while crimes of the powerful have a deleterious effect on society, so do street crimes. It also suggests that street crime is a serious problem and not really just a moral panic issue. Crime control policies need to address not only the crimes of the wealthy, but the crimes committed by the poor against the poor. So we're not worried about just the wealthy being impacted, but anybody that's being impacted by crime. The next contemporary stream of thought is feminism. It highlights the fact that the social world is fundamentally gendered. That is, men and women encounter different life experiences that are a product of the culture and historical and societal processes that are interwoven with race and class inequalities. And there's three subcategories under the feminism. Radical feminism identifies a patriarchal social order where men dominate. Marxist feminism sees women as dominated by the men as a result of disproportionate location of economic power. And socialist feminism that sees capitalism as inevitably flawed, producing a range of oppression, including that experienced by women. And the third one is postmodernism, the belief that it is time to move on to a new way of understanding, that knowledge is viewed as egalitarian, equal consideration is extended to anyone understanding of the world, discourse analysis, and is central to postmodernism is the idea of deconstructionism, tearing down the existing bodies of knowledge. Don't you love all those isms that we read about? And now I'm going to move on to chapter 10. I spent a little bit more time on that chapter than I wanted to, but it's because when we look at conflict theory, sometimes it can be confusing and there's a lot of definitions. Make sure that you know the difference between Marxism and what Durkheim believed. That will be on your quiz, as well as those other few things that I stated. And you might want to take a break now and just stop it and go do something for a few minutes, because this next chapter that talks about integration of theories and life course perspective, I will go over some of the questions that I'm going to give you on the exam. And in this chapter, we're going to talk about integrated theoretical models where different elements of different theories are combined to make a more comprehensive understanding of criminal behavior. In that, remember, I said it's very difficult to use just one theory to explain behavior. We're also going to look at the research on criminal careers. The criminal career approach has sought to identify high rate offenders and to isolate factors. And then also developmental criminology, which is a combination of integrated theoretical models and criminal career research. The integrated theoretical models combine existing theories to help explain why crime occurs. And a few examples: Shaw and McKay in 1942, the social disorganization theory with social learning theory, and Cloward and Olin in 1960 with strain theory and social learning theory. In earlier attempts to integrate theories to explain individual levels of behavior through a combination of social psychological theories, and the most common attempts at integration have involved social control and social learning theories, which are the two that we talked about last week. Ruth Kornhauser, a researcher, she suggested that social structural theories assume that a general consensus exists with regard to basic values expressed in the criminal law, is why she believes that theories can be combined. We have to look at the concerns, though, and some of the issues with combining and integrating theories. For instance, strain is a theory that looks at crime on the macro level and looks at societal causes of crime, whereas control is more of the micro level, looking at individual causes of crime, as well as learning theory, that the person starts off with a blank slate and therefore behavior is learned from peers and not society. The most common approaches to integration is through social psychology theories, social control and social learning theories, social control and strain theories, and the end-to-end model, which is combining theories in a sequential model that seek to explain delinquent behavior. In other words, it starts off with the social control theory of explaining crime, and then it moves to the strain theory and the American dream theory, on to the learning theory. that, for instance, if you are a person that is living in a lower income and you want to make that American dream, but there's nothing available for you to do that, you might then look to those that have done it and possibly learn from them on how to integrate that, and even though it may not be the legal ramification. Ding, ding, ding. One of the questions on your test will be that theoretical integration combines elements of traditional perspectives to provide a more comprehensive explanation of crime. And also make sure you know what are the most common integrated theories, the ones I just went over right here. An ongoing heated controversy in criminology centers around whether criminals comprise a distinctive group within the general population. Proponents of the criminal career concept maintain that individuals can be dichotomized into active offenders and non-offenders. Crime is reportedly one of the major concerns reported by Americans, and Gluck and Gluck found that delinquent boys continued their illegal activity into adulthood. Remember, the criminal career consists of a beginning time, referred to as the initiation, as well as the period of offending, which is duration, and at some measurable level, frequency, or lambda. And lambda is how you measure frequency, and a period of inactivity, which is referred to as discontinuity or termination. The term criminal career signifies the sequence of offending during some time period and is not an assumption that an individual earns a livelihood through criminal activity. I know many times when you think, oh, they're a criminal career, that they're making money, that's their career in order to support themselves. It doesn't. It just means that it goes over a certain time frame. The relevance of policy around this paradigm suggests that a policy of selective incapacitation will affect the crime rate. Again, that will be on your quiz. Suggests that a policy of selective incapacitation. The objectives of the criminal career research are to accurately identify the high rate offender, to identify factors associated with when it starts, continues, and stops, and to determine the average number of offenses that are committed by each offender during that time period. Talking now about developmental and life course criminology, which is a process after the integrations. We're looking at this along with the career criminal. It focuses on the development of antisocial behavior across the life course, across a time frame, and the various factors that promote stability and any changes in behavior. It also recognizes that the causes of antisocial and criminal behavior can vary across the life course of an individual. So we're looking at trajectory and risk factors. Oftentimes, the antisocial behavior emerges very early in the individual's life, and the behavior continues to develop and grow as they mature through their life course. Absolute versus relative stability. Absolute stability is used to describe stability of behavior within individuals, and relative describes stability of behavior between individuals. There's two processes that may reduce stability in behavior, and that's cumulative continuity. That antisocial behavior produces negative consequences. In turn, these negative consequences promote the stability of antisocial behavior. It's a continuum. Interactional continuity states three things. Individual traits cause them to interact in a certain way within the environment. Individuals tend to create the same social situations over and over again, and stability in their social interaction creates stability in their behavior. There are also two perspectives that have been identified as we study antisocial behavior. State dependence. argues that early antisocial behavior indirectly increases the risk of later antisocial behavior, and population heterogeneity perspective, that early antisocial behavior is related to later criminal behavior because of some underlying propensity for that behavior. There's an underlying reason for that behavior. And what are the causes of this antisocial behavior across the life course of an individual? The life course criminology argues that antisocial behavior results from the intersection, the crossover of genetic, biological, psychological, sociological, and situational risk factors. Covers them all. Risk factors that promote antisocial and criminal behavior may or may not be the same factors that promote dissidence from antisocial behavior. And here's something that will be on your quiz about the adolescent limited offenders. We moved to Moffitt's typology, and she said we have adolescent limited offenders and life course persistent offenders. That the adolescents typically begin offending during adolescence and usually stop within their early 20s. This is also supported by a lot of research that if we would just continue working with juveniles, a high majority of them will age out and won't commit any further crime after they reach their 20s. Anyway, under her typology, behavior is a function of the developmental stage and social interactions. The life course persistent offenders typically exhibit antisocial behavior very early in life, age 3, and they just continue on into adulthood. Their behavior results from the intersection of biological-based neurophysiological problems and negative social environments. So it's a combination. It's like it's looking at the biosocial that we talked about last week. And Sampson and Lobb, they coined the age-graded theory of informal social control. So make sure you understand we're looking at informal ways of causing behavior. They suggest that poor attachment to one's parents, what does that sound like? Teachers, neighborhood, and pro-social peers may place one at risk for experimenting with antisocial behavior. They argue that weak social bonds, what does that sound like? May be related to antisocial behavior in both childhood and early adulthood, but also that parental social bonds are relevant to childhood antisocial behavior. So remember, this was exactly from social bond theory, Gottfredson and Hershey. And as I stated then, it's just a continuation of other theories. That's why we're looking at these integrated theories and ways to combine different aspects of different theories. Interactionism suggests that crime is a product of interaction between the offender and society. Focuses on the actions and reactions of individuals and groups and how they impact each other. It also provides a theoretical framework for studying the victimless crimes that we're going to talk about next week. And labeling theories are at the forefront of this paradigm. Remember, at the very beginning of this presentation, I talked about interactionism and symbolism, and we talked about labeling theories. The theoretical integration that we've been talking about suggests that no one particular set of assumptions or theory can explain a phenomenon. Rests on the premise that by integrating two or more theoretical approaches, crime can be more fully understood, and discusses life course criminology. So integrating a number of different theories can help us explain a lot more types of behavior. And last, the media and crime. How does the media impact crime? How does it impact how we react to crime? So what kinds of stories does the major media sources typically report? I want you to think about this question and bring some answers to class. The media tends to sensationalize. It only selects few accounts of crime leading to a misinformed society. They always pick the most gruesome one to get attention from society. They are less concerned with the context of the crime and the causes. If you try and look up a crime that has been reported by a media and try to find out, well, wonder what the causes were behind this, or what did they lead to. They don't go into that. Even with the last shooting that happened at the school in San Bernardino, with the husband shooting his wife. If you listen to all the media reports, they just talk about the actions and what happened. They don't really go into anything that has to do with it, and they really don't care about that part. They just want that attention factor. Sorry for the long 35 minutes, but I hope you took some breaks and paid attention to what I said about what will be on the test. Again, I did say you need to know what an adolescent limited offender is. You need to know the different types of stability. When we talked about antisocial behavior, the absolute, need to know about the criminal career, selective incapacitation, and also, too, make sure you know the differences in those theories that I talked about in the first chapter with the conflict theorist.